All right, well, first of all, I didn't know that there was going to be anyone here who disagreed with me. I'm not happy about that. So, if you could raise your... No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to do that. Ruth is absolutely right. I am so glad to be with you guys today and be with people who have lots of diverse opinions. In fact, that's one of the things I like still about newspapers. I think it's one of the last bastions of diverse opinions that are out there every day, sometimes even maybe too diverse. Yesterday we had a pro and con on the January 6th insurrection, which I wasn't that familiar with the pro side of it until I read that piece yesterday. But thank you for being here. Thanks for being here during a pandemic. You're not only braving that, you're braving box lunches. So that is all pretty impressive that you got out here today. I know that Diana and Matt, where is Matt? There he is. Matt has been on me pretty consistently to be here, so I appreciate that. The truth is, I understand it though, is that Matt, Diana, and the rest of you wanted someone from the Sentinel. You're probably familiar with what the Sentinel is today compared to what it used to be. You didn't have many choices. I mean, it was me, the janitor, or Mike Bianchi, and they were both busy, so you're stuck with me today. But I appreciate your passion for newspapers, and the truth is that we're doing okay, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the state of the industry of newspapers and the issues that I'm watching and covering closest. I want to start by just giving you a little bit of background about how I got into the business. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina. I was the son of a lawyer. I was a father, the daughter of I was not a daughter. I was the son of a mother who ran a volunteer center up there. I grew up at the tail end of the Watergate era, and that was sort of intoxicating. The idea that a couple of ink-stained wretches could topple a presidency was intriguing to me. One of the slogans that I've sort of embraced is that a newspaper columnist's job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I like doing the second part of that. I'll be honest, a little more than the first. Another slogan I am a big fan of is about skepticism in newspapers, and that's that we say in the newsroom, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. My mother hates that expression, but it's a good thing. We try not to take anything for granted with what we're doing. I always like newspapers. I mentioned this in my disclosure that Ruth mentioned. When I was a kid, I don't know what got into me, but I used to go to my dad's law office back when there were mimeograph machines and crank out copies of newspapers that back then I called the Maxwell House News. And they were really big breaking stories back then, like Scott's dad mows grass. And I'd peddle them around the neighborhood for about a nickel a piece. And I ended up going to UNC Chapel Hill for journalism school, went to school in Winston-Salem, and then in 1998, which is now about 24 years ago, the Sentinel called me to see if I wanted to come cover a campaign of a young lawyer who was starting a new campaign for mayor back then, Mel Martinez. You remember Mel. Mel was mayor and then HUD secretary and then U.S. He didn't finish many jobs, but he was pretty well liked, and I actually liked him when he was doing his job down here. And that was 23 years ago. And now is when I'm going to get to the depressing part of our talk, because I just want to get that out of the way. And that is when I came here to the Orlando Sentinel 24 years ago. This newspaper had 14 different news bureaus. We had them in San Juan, Atlanta, there were 3 in Volusia, there were 2 in Seminole County, there were 2 in Lake County, and Osceola. Today, we have 0. When I came, we had about 300 to 400 reporters. Today, we have about 60. I had 4 friends that I ate with lunch with almost every day for about a decade, and all 4 of them left within a period of about 6 months. A few years back. I actually coaxed one of them back a few years ago. His name is Jason Garcia, and he's kicking tail with a lot of the dark money coverage we've been had. But the bottom line is the newspaper business is not the same business that I watched as a child growing up, and as that most of you all were used to. It's not even the same business it was 10 years ago. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, and the biggest one, is just pretty simple. It's the internet. The internet came along, and about when it did in 99, 2000, most newspapers in America made a really bad decision. They had a product that nobody could ever get unless they plunked down a quarter at that point in time to get. And almost every newspaper owner in America said, hey, let's put everything we do online for free and then see which one consumers prefer. That wasn't a close call. And we've raised one, maybe two generations with the expectation that they don't have to pay for news. And that's just not how it works. It takes a lot of people. You have to have somebody go to City Hall, to go to the school board meetings. I don't know if anybody wants to attend Winter Park City Council meetings, but regularly we have to go to those things. It takes a staff to do all of that stuff. And my kids are part of that generation that grew up not paying attention to news. In fact, if I want to keep something from my son as a secret, the safest place for me to put it is in my column. There is no chance he is going to read it there. But there's been more than that. There's also the advent of social media, where people would like to get their news in 30 words or less on Twitter. And a big part of it is segregated news, and I think you guys know that. There's news for your left, there's news for your right. You can choose the one that suits your ideological fancy and sort of bathe in the waters of bias confirmation, where nothing is going to upset any of the things that people want to believe. That's easier. But I think newspapers do a better job of giving the full story, sometimes what people don't want to hear. But those are all the reasons why things started to get a little rougher. And that's part one. Part two was ownership. For about 100 years, I should stop by saying the Orlando Sentinel is owned by the Tribune. That's Chicago, Sun Sentinel, down in Fort Lauderdale. There are a number of papers. We had the LA Times, Baltimore, for different papers at different stages. I'm going to say about a decade ago, sort of the first real bad thing happened. Sam Zell, who was a billionaire who did really well in real estate, decided to buy the Tribune. He did not do as well with newspapers as he had in real estate. He took a company that had been around for about a century and drove it right into bankruptcy. A group bought us out. It's Wall Street owned. One of the things I think people do not, that would shock people about the newspaper industry, is we are still profitable. We are still very profitable. To the extent that I've never worked at this paper. I haven't seen the 2021 numbers. But I have never worked at this newspaper in Orlando where we had less than double-digit percentage profit margins. Never lost a dime in the years that we've been operating, during the recession, during any other time. The problem is, it's never enough for Wall Street. It's never enough when you're trying to drive up stock prices. And so even when we were making profit margins of 10 to 15 to 19% some years, there were cuts most of the year, and that's how a staff of 350 went to 290, went to 220, went to 150, to now what we are having here. And then last year, and here's the tail end of my depressing part of the news, we were bought, the Tribune was bought by a hedge fund named Alden. I asked to not have audio or video at this event. If I had audio, I would start playing Darth Vader's theme song when I mention Alden. Hedge funds aren't generally good for newspapers in general, but Alden is probably the worst. And yes, they're my owner. They do not care what I think, and I've written this in the paper. Alden has a track record of buying up newspapers and bleeding them dry, making cuts, letting newsrooms go to pot, and their point is not to hold on to them for a long time. They don't mind if they don't survive in the long term, because they want to use the money to finance other ventures. So it's a good money-making strategy. I'd submit it's not a great journalism strategy. They bought a chain of papers in California, and I think the newsroom cuts were about 70% after they took over. And once again, Alden doesn't care what I say. I'm just a piece on a chessboard. And to their credit, no one from Alden's ever tried to stop me from saying what I want to say. And this is probably a good point to address one of the questions I always get. That is one of the things that I will say about this newspaper that is really beyond reproach. In 23 years, well, 28 that I've been writing a column, no editor, no publisher has ever tried to tell me what I can write or what I can't write. I've had some uncomfortable conversations with publishers. In fact, about a decade or so ago, we had one where I wrote a column about tax loopholes. Companies that I thought industries were getting unfair tax advantages. And when I went through a list that somebody had prepared of all the companies that were getting unfair tax advantages, one of them was for newspaper inserts. They weren't taxed, and it didn't strike me as a good reason why those shouldn't be taxed any more than anybody else. And I wrote a column and said, here's way we could, save $500 million by closing these tax loopholes. And the publisher called me into his office that day, and he said, "Scott, I just have a question to ask you." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Do you have any idea how much money that would cost us if they ended that tax loophole?" And I said, "Yes, sir, it's $56 million. We put it on the front page today." That was the last thing he ever said to me about it. He did not say, "Do not write it." He did not say, we're going to kill it. He just wanted me to know where he stands, and I completely respect that, and I'm okay with that. So Alden has not tried to affect any of our editorial content, and so far we have not seen significant changes. But I'm not saying anything, betraying any confidence when I say that this was not good news for those of us who worked in the newsroom. In fact, our editorial board, before the sale went through, wrote a piece entitled, "Please Deliver Us from Alden." And in fact, there were people in this community who wanted to buy this paper and keep it locally owned. I thought that was the best idea. I had damn near a dozen lunches with people who wanted to do that. There was one group and one individual who found the money, had a price that was way more than the Orlando Sentinel was worth, and who wanted to buy us and keep it a local paper. The problem is, what I came back to earlier, we made too much money. That Alden didn't want to give us up because we're a pretty good cash cow. So that's why the prospect of newspapers isn't terribly exciting, why I don't necessarily encourage my own children to go into the profession, not that they would. But let me tell you some of the good stuff. Let me tell you why I've stayed, because I've been tempted. I've been offered to leave my job in buyouts more times than I can count. But I believe in what we do, and I believe that we can make a difference. I get to write about developers that are looking to strike shady deals outside of the sunshine. I get to look at politicians who are skirting the laws, sometimes who end up in prison. Some of these politicians, by the way, have been telling me I'm going to lose my job for a decade or 20 years, and they've lost re-election or been incarcerated in that time, and I'm still here. I get to expose shady deals at the Expressway Authority, at the Orlando Airport. I get to promote nonprofits. I believe nonprofits are the heart and soul of Central Florida or any community. I get to give voice to the voiceless, give the business to politicians, and at least every week I get to see an email from one reader who tells me I have shit for brains. You don't, excuse my language, you don't get to do that in any other job, and it's kind of fun. I got to tell you, I don't mind mean emails. Please don't send me any. But I like to hear a diverse amount of opinions. And I will tell you that it is truly an honor, because I've had the ability, or the privilege I should say, to write about nonprofits and have someone respond 2 days later with $50,000. We read about this in the Sentinel. We believe in your mission. Here's a check. I had a guy one time just leave an envelope with $1,000 cash in the lobby and said, "Please get this to the cause you wrote about." My wife and I had a great trip to Vegas. No, I'm not kidding about that. No, but that's not only trust in the cause, it's trust in giving the money. That's a privilege and an honor, and I don't know many other jobs that would allow me to do that. So I'll tell you a little bit, and I want to also stop here to say, I want to take your questions, because I don't like listening to myself yap. I can only imagine how you all feel. So I want to save some time for questions. They can be as tough as you want, either about the business or things in the community or what I've written. But I want to tell you a little bit about what I write about, the things that I care about. And primarily, if there's one overriding thing, it's I care about community issues, community and state issues. I believe that there are more than enough people in this country yapping about Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I want to yap about things locally. And by the way, no one cares what I think about Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I'm going to burst some of your bubbles. Nobody cares what you think about that. I mean, seriously, do I think anybody picks up the paper one day and says, "You know what? I am undecided about Donald Trump. I need Scott Maxwell to tell me what to think about that"? They don't. I just think there's so many people bloviating and being gas bags on TV about this. I want to be your local gas bag. That's where my, I think I can affect change. I think that's what newspapers are supposed to do. And write about like shady deals at the airport where the lobbyists are pulling strings, conflicts of interest and inside dealing at the blood bank, for those of you who have been around and remember some of that. I want to write about Visit Orlando when they're taking $50 or $60 million a year of tax dollars and not telling the public how that money is being spent. I generally think if you want to take me off, keep a secret with how public tax dollars are being spent. I often have told people before, if I ask a public official for a document and they give it to me, I might not even read it. I probably will. If I ask you for a document and you don't give it to me, that's my new mission in life. That's the only thing I care about. I don't believe there should be secrets when it comes to government and tax dollars. I like to write about local legislators that are rigging laws for donors. In fact, the column I just turned in, which will be in Sunday's paper, it is online now, is about those donors. It's about how it doesn't just happen that the Florida legislature calls a special session to greenlight a gambling deal for the Seminole tribe. I mean, think about all the issues that we have in this state, from the economy to public education to families with special needs, that none of these things get special sessions. We haven't had one in a long time. There was one for the Seminole tribe to cut for a deal that it turns out a judge said was wildly unconstitutional. That's because big checks are cut from the tribe. And it goes, by the way, to both parties. That's part of what my column is about for Sunday. I'm a little left of center, as I put. I'm an independent, non-party, but I admit I'm a little left of center, and I get a lot of Democrats that say, you get them, it's all the Republicans. It is not all the Republicans. If you care about hotel taxes, I won't get too far down this road. Hotel taxes are something that I think should be spent to benefit local communities. This is what other tourism communities do. In Las Vegas, they take hotel taxes and spend them on schools and roads and parks. This community has never done that. This community has hoarded those primarily for Visit Orlando and for a convention center. Our convention center is 7 million square feet. It is one of the largest structures, not in Orlando, not in Central Florida, not in Florida, not in America. It is one of the largest structures on planet Earth. It is larger than the Pentagon, which is known as the biggest office building. I don't think we need, but if that building isn't doing the job, another 500,000 square feet is not going to do it. I'm digressing a little bit here. I think that hotel taxes should be spent on things that the community needs and things that benefit the tourism workers. The buses. Right now our bus system in Lynx is one of the most underfunded in America. Hotel workers who can't afford to live near I-Drive have to get buses up in a COE that take them an hour and a half each way because it's 3 transfers to get there. I think hotel taxes should fund things like the bus system, the same way hotel taxes fund things like rail in Las Vegas. This is my long-winded way of saying Orange County is completely controlled by Democrats. It is completely controlled by Democrats on the county commission and almost exclusively in legislative offices. But Disney and the Hotel Lodging Association and Universal fund those people to great ends. The only reason we have not diversified that hotel taxes, at least nowadays, is because those interests fund the Democratic, primarily politicians here. So I'll get off that soapbox, but there are problems. I've often said neither party has the market cornered on brains or good ethics, and I think I see that every day. But I wanted to give you one other example, because I just have always found this one of the more egregious ones of the influence, of the nefarious influence of money in politics. A few years ago, there was a bill filed, and it was about timeshares. And the bill basically said that if timeshare companies made an error, if the timeshare companies made an error, and the consumer found out about it, they could not get out of the error. Now, timeshares, I'm going to submit, are probably not generally known for being the most scrupulous of industries, but forget that it's timeshare. Why would the legislature pass any bill that said if a company made an error against the consumer's favor, it could not be corrected? And so we started looking into that, and one of the things we found was that there were 2 sponsors, one in the Senate, one in the House. I don't want to mention any of their names, but in the House it was Eric Eisnagel, who's now, by the way, a District Court of Appeals judge. They took money from the Timeshare Association, but I went to Eric Eisnagel and Kelly Stargell, and I said, we have a state of 20 million people. Can you give me one citizen of this state who who said that they thought this bill was needed. One citizen who said, we don't think we should be able to get out of contracts so the timeshare company screws up. Starcel didn't respond, Eisnagel delayed. Finally, Eisnagel sent me one name of one person. And by the way, that would be pretty lame if you could still only come up with one. As it turns out, the name of the person I guess he thought I wouldn't check was the head of the National Timeshare Owners Association. This is what money does to policy, not just in Florida, but in the country. It warps it in a way that these kind of bills would not otherwise be filed, and or be passed. And by the way, just this morning I was looking at another set of timeshare bills that was filed just a few weeks ago, and the timeshare owners gave about $50,000 to make sure they have some influence. So the problem with money, in my estimation, is that it can be donated in unlimited amounts. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for the Supreme Court, and very rarely would I presume to believe that the United States Supreme Court got something wrong. But they got this one wrong. It's a case called Citizens United, and what this court ultimately decided was they equated money to free speech. That anybody can give as much money as they want to a campaign because it's a demonstration of free speech. I don't believe, and people much smarter than I, and a number of members of the Supreme Court, do not believe that's what the Founding Fathers had in mind. Founding Fathers meant free speech was that you could say whatever you want without fear of being imprisoned for it. The government could not stop you from saying what you want. They did not mean that ABC Incorporated was entitled to funnel $50 million to a governor or a city council member. And that is what we have. Right now, and what's kind of remarkable is that the politicians rake in this money. Governor Ron DeSantis has the biggest committee of anybody in the state right now. He has taken in, I think it's $100 million in the last couple of years. And Ron DeSantis recently signed a bill that threatened to throw any citizen in prison if they donated more than $3,000 to an amendment drive. Now, the amendment drives are the things you vote on every year. Maybe there's one for smaller class sizes, maybe one for medical marijuana, maybe for felons' right. The legislature passed and the governor signed one that would have made it a crime for citizens to donate more than $3,000 to those causes. Meanwhile, they take checks of up to $5 million apiece. I think the Supreme Court got it wrong on that one. The trade-off was supposed to be that I think it was Alito who said, we will let them give unlimited money, we just are going to force them to disclose how it's being given. That might have been an okay trade-off, but that's not what happens, which is, as you all have seen, as we've seen in writing a lot about dark money, that money gets pretty hidden. So I'll come back to that in just a minute. Some of the other issues I care about, one of the big ones are wages. I've written this, if you can stop me if you've heard it before, but I think a lot of people are shocked to realize that in Orlando, Central Florida, a relatively affluent group area that does well, we have the lowest median wage of any major city in America. Of the 50 largest regions in America, we are 50th when it comes to median wages. And that is because we have a community that's primarily built on the backs of people who clean hotel rooms and who fry chicken tenders for a living. I was never big on the $15 an hour minimum wage. I could take it or leave it. I ended up supporting it. That's not what solves a problem like this. The reason we have so many low-wage jobs is because of one industry, and I could even be okay with that. We all know we're here for tourism. That's why Orlando came to be what it is. But this state and this community keeps subsidizing tourism unlike they subsidize any other industry. I'm going to submit that most of you have been or are in some sort of businesses. And when you were in your businesses, if you wanted to take out an ad, you had to use your own damn dollars for it. Tourism is the only industry that takes billions, and that's with a B, of tax dollars every year to slap Minnie Mouse's picture on a bus in Times Square, that's an actual example, and do other things like that to promote it. So we are pressing the gas, the accelerator, on a distortion of the market to create more of those lowest wage jobs. I think that's a problem. I'm not really a big fan of public tax dollars subsidizing any industry. But if we are going to subsidize any industry, I think it should be the higher wage ones, the ones that provide people with jobs they can live of. Because the real problem with wages is really just one of basic math, which is how I try to look at most everything. If the average person in this region makes this much money, and the average cost of living is right here, then there's a gap. And we're going to fill that gap. We have a choice on how we're going to fill that gap. We can raise wages, or what we've been doing, we can give all kinds of subsidies. We can subsidize food stamps, we can do more public housing, ERs can be strained, nonprofits can be strained. Those are all the things that fill in the gap. I think it'd be better to have people make more money and live on their own. So that's my wage soapbox. The other thing I like to write about is sort of corruption, or questionable activity, I should say. The airport, and if you're looking for corruption, all you have to do is follow the money. Wherever the most money is, that's where problems will be. In fact, we had a story on the front page, I think it was today or yesterday, about the 6 finalists for the airport. Normally, who would care? It's just, for the new CEO of the airport. Normally, who would care? But that is one of the biggest money operations in all of Central Florida, and also the state from a public standpoint. Billions of dollars go through there. And about a few years ago, there was an effort to have a coup to throw. That was one of the funnier coups we saw. I'm not always a big Buddy Dyer fan, but Buddy Dyer's, I think, done a pretty decent job, particularly as it relates to the airport, and he was trying to stop some lobbyists from getting their tentacles into the airport. There was a coup filed by some of the governor's appointees and supported by legislators to try to throw the mayor of Orlando off the board at the airport. Do you know who owns the airport? It's Orlando. I don't know how you throw the mayor of Orlando off the airport board that it owns, but that was one of the efforts. And I'm going to submit that it was partly the Sentinel that dug into that and stopped that from happening. There was an FDLE investigation that, of course, concluded they couldn't conclude anything. That's a theme in a lot of what we write about, and that brings me to the most complicated point. If you thought I'd been complicated before, wait till this one. And that's dark money and ghost candidates. And basically, what's supposed to happen with regards to political donations is what I mentioned just a moment ago. Theoretically, in this country, the trade-off is corporations, special interests can give unlimited amounts of money. They just have to disclose how they're doing it. That does not happen. It does not happen here. It does not happen in Washington, D.C. It does not happen a lot of places. Groups form one group. They funnel it to another group, which funnels it to another group, which goes to a P.O. box in Denver, Colorado. That's an actual example that we've been following here. There have been fictitious names made up with this, and you can't ever find out where the money ultimately came from. And where we've seen a whole lot of dark money, and what we've been a little obsessed with in writing about at the Sentinel, is in some Senate races this past year. And that's where the term ghost candidates comes out. And that sounds spooky, and it is in some way. What a ghost candidate is say you've got two candidates in a race, a Democrat and a Republican. That's what people might expect. A ghost candidate is a non-party candidate, a third-party candidate. What I would be if I ran for office. An independent who files to run for office, but never actually does any campaigning. All they are doing is a name on the ballot. And then the dark money comes in. And let's just say that the dark money, which might be, for example, power companies or theme parks, what they might do is they might want one of those two candidates, say the Republican in this case that we've been writing about, to win. What they're going to do is take that ghost candidate, the one who's not even running, and they're going to dump bucket loads of money into that race trying to promote that ghost candidate and make voters think that they're the Democrat. And now you go, wait, now I'm confused. I thought they liked the Republican. Well, they do like the Republican. All they're trying to do is split up the votes between the Democrat and the ghost candidate. That happened in 3 races, in 3 Senate races in the state this year. And in one of them, the ghost candidate, who they recruited, he actually had the same last name as the Democrat who was running. So they were really trying to confuse. There were 2 Rodriguez's, and one was an actual Democrat, and the other one was a fake ghost candidate, and they all told the voters that the fake one was a big loyal Democrat. The ghost candidate got, I'm not going to get these numbers exactly right, I'm going to say like 3,000 votes, and the Republican ended up winning by about 300 votes. If those votes hadn't gone to the ghost candidate and actually gone for people who thought they wanted to vote for a Democrat in South Florida, by the way, which is more Democrat, the Democrat probably would have run. But here's the thing. Everything I just described to you, That's legal. You can do that in the state. You are allowed to lie. You are allowed to put up ghost candidates. You're allowed to do any of that. What you're not allowed to do is hide the money. You're not allowed, candidates have to file disclosures and things like that. And what we found out, and the Miami Herald also ended up reporting on this, was that there were a lot of unanswered questions. There were paperwork that hadn't been filed. So we wrote about this. The two main cases were right here. Yeah, you want to take over? Yeah, that's right. And once again, I don't want to name any names, but it's Jason Broder. And it's raised up in Seminole County, and then one down in South Florida. Papers wrote about all this. In South Florida, the prosecutor said, that looks like it stinks. And she started investigating. And she not only investigated, she got indictments and arrested a former state senator who was the one who, as it turned out, got the ghost candidate to run and paid him money that he did not disclose, according to the prosecutors, illegally. Prosecutor got in, got the answers, made an arrest. Here in Seminole County, the prosecutor said, that's not my job. That's Phil Archer. And Phil Archer said, I don't have enough staff. I've just never considered it a prosecutor's job to investigate. Well, I think that explanation stinks, which I told Mr. Archer in a few columns. But just for argument's sake, I said, okay, Mr. Archer, if a crime was permitted, took place here, who do you think should investigate that? He said, that would be the FDLE or the Secretary of State. And I said, wonderful. I go to the FDLE and the Secretary of State. They go, that's not really our job. That's probably the prosecutor. That's how this story ended. With one prosecutor deciding to look for answers and making arrests, and another prosecutor and legal system deciding there was nothing to see here. We didn't go away. We pounded on this for about a year. The FDLE finally agreed to investigate about 2 months ago. And by the way, I don't presume to know all the answers. I've never said lock anybody up. I've never said arrest anybody. I've said that citizens have a right to know how money was spent in a legal way in which it's supposed to be spent. But frankly, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that the FDLE is going to do it. I think it may have to come from the feds. And if you think about the other highest profile corruption case you have seen in this community in recent years, that took the feds. That was Joel Greenberg. Our paper wrote for years about Joel Greenberg. One story after another. It started out as goofy and strange, like when he put a white blinking lights on his car and slapped on a fake badge and tried to pull someone over for speeding in his neighborhood. Normally that's called impersonating an officer and it's a crime. The prosecutor, who didn't prosecute the other thing, decided that wasn't anything he needed to go after for Joel Greenberg. But we wrote about lots of other things. We wrote about his friends that were getting contracts from Seminole County. Lots of them that were getting there. There was questionable spending on Bitcoin. We wrote story after story after all this. It looked like it was misusing county funds. Seminole County didn't investigate. FDLE didn't investigate. The sheriff's office didn't. The sheriff's office investigated one part of it. It wasn't until the feds came in and indicted Joel Greenberg on 33 counts, and now he's pled guilty to about 8 of them. I think that's a problem. I think a local community should be able to clean up its own messes. So maybe the feds will get involved in what's going on in the dark money. I don't want to go on too long, because I'm sure you guys will have questions. Before we go, I want to tell you that not all of it is serious that I do. I also like to write about goofy things. Some of the stories that I've had fun with is writing about really Floridian stories, like the things you find in your toilet. I don't know if you all have had any of these experiences. I one time started to sit down on a Cuban tree frog in the middle of the night. I will never touch a toilet without flipping on the bathroom light after that happened. But I got away easy. There have been Floridians that have found iguanas, snakes. There's a guy who got bit, by the way, by a snake that was in his toilet. It was in his finger, on his finger, and I think that guy should count himself as lucky, as that's the only place he got. But these aren't problems that happen in any other state. One of the other columns I wrote a number of years ago that I still get asked about is a debate over dog poop. And maybe you all have had this with some of your friends before. The debate is whether it's okay, after you scoop up your dog's poop and put it in a bag, whether it's okay to put that bag in somebody else's trash can. Now, I thought we have very few agreed upon rules in a civilized society. But one of them is that you don't take poo and give it to somebody else. But apparently, this is a raging debate. Apparently there's a lot of folks who think it's okay to do that. And I was shocked to find out I'm married to one of those people. 25 years, and I learned out I'm married to a dog poop person. Those stories are kind of fun to write about, and I decided to not take a stance anymore because that one's too controversial. I'll take on the governor, but not the dog poop people. But we got so many other interesting things in this state that don't happen elsewhere. You know, we've got hurricanes and sinkholes. We have deadly amoeba and giant snails. We have lightning. We're the shark attack capital of the world. Both of those things. We are the only place on God's great green earth where alligators and crocodiles cohabitate in the same environment during the Everglades. All that terrifying stuff, and people move here every day. That tells you something about the people we're covering, and it's a lot of fun to write, and part of why I enjoy doing it so much. But I will tell you one last thing about writing an opinion column, and that is that those things are kind of the easy things. Writing an opinion column about hard-hitting stuff is hard. If you do it well, and I'm not even going to submit I necessarily do it well, but I strive to, and it's hard. And the reason it's hard to write a solid opinion column is because everybody or anybody can have an opinion. Anybody can tell you what they think, and the truth is most people don't care, and certainly nobody's going to pay for that opinion. The old expression, opinions are like rear ends, everyone has one. No one cares unless you can convince people that your opinion is backed up by facts. Lots of facts, and probably by giving them some information they haven't seen anywhere else before. I think those opinions also have to address legitimate opposing viewpoints. I wrote a column in Thursday's paper about the need to end secrecy in the grand jury process. It was related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. It's been 15 years since cops said that guy needed to face a whole slew of charges down in South Florida, and a deal was struck to let him spend only 13 months in a facility that he was allowed to leave during the day and go to his office. Everybody has universally agreed that something bad happened there. The feds ultimately got involved later, a decade later, and arrested him. To this day, neither the victims nor the public knows what happened in that grand jury room. I think that's a problem. There are some legitimate reasons to keep things secret in a grand jury while they're going on. I can't think of a good reason for keeping them secret after a case has been totally closed. The reason I mentioned that background for that is when I started writing that column, the first thing I did was try to find about 3 articles making the case for why there should be secrecy in the grand jury process. Because my column is going to be a lot better if I can consider the opposing viewpoint to what I'm writing than the one I bring in to begin with. I'd rather hear the best arguments against what I'm saying before I publish than after. So I like to think about things, challenge my own opinions. I like people who like to do the same thing, and I believe newspapers, which carry a wide variety of opinions, including those who think I had the you-know-what for brains, are some of the best venues for doing that. So that's why I'm still here, and I very much appreciate that you all care, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Back there.
Scott, how do you get your leads for these stories about the airport and all these other random things?
Yeah, the question is, where do I get the ideas for columns like the airport? Mostly I read. I'm a little weird with my sleeping habits. I'm usually up by 4 most days. I find there are a lot fewer distractions before the sun rises, and I try to read everything I can. And usually I would say, I think someone mentioned, I am you, you are me. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think when you all read stories, you sometimes go, wait, that part didn't make sense. There's got to be more to that story than what I just read right there. I feel fortunate to be in a position where I get to go after more of those answers. So a lot of it is just reading things where I have questions. That said, I've been doing this long enough that I get calls. And sometimes I'll get a call that says, hey, you need to watch what's going to happen at the airport. This afternoon. There's going to be a coup to try to take it over. And I've been given tips that I simply didn't believe because they sounded too nutties. And by the way, some of the tips I've gotten, you would be shocked at the people who call me spouses. Spouses. I mean, I've had more than I can count on one hand. And I don't mean ex-spouses. I mean current spouses. I one time had, now this one was a stepmother, but she brought me the sealed, and otherwise sealed documents on her stepson's prior criminal history to look at this stuff. So I do get tips for a lot of things. I will tell you, if you're a politician, don't cheat on your spouse. Because when I get a call at 2 a.m. that says, I won't say his name, if you want to know where Senator blah, blah, blah is, I'll tell you one thing, it's not here at home at 2 a.m. I think I can put together what happened in those cases. I don't chase many of those down, but I do chase down the tips about legitimate things.
Hi, Scott. I've enjoyed your talk so much. And one of the questions I have is that nowadays, you know, the media is maligned by a particular political party to the point where they say that they don't read anything. They only, I guess, like to watch YouTube and get all their information from, you know, conspiracy sources and things of this sort. And now you're also talking about your company that has purchased the Sentinel, and how all these different companies are consolidating under these money groups that are you know, essentially put there in order to do away with the media. At least that's what I heard also on a TV show that I like. But
there's some truth to that. So the question is, like, how do we deal with both the
Rachel Maddow, by the way.
Okay. With the antagonism. Well, first of all, there is a lot of criticism of the media, and I got to tell you, some of it is valid. I mean, I don't always like the way my industry handles things. Even in Florida, man, I'll tell you, Ron DeSantis, I am not a big fan, but that man is masterful with his manipulation of the press. I mean, he holds a press conference every single day, and every newspaper goes and parrots what he says, and by keeping them busy just parroting the press conference of the day, there's not much time. Here's an actual example. 2 days ago, there was a story on our front page that was where it said DeSantis, there was big letters, DeSantis blames feds for COVID testing shortage. And it was giant on our front page because that's what he'd said at the previous day's press conference. In today's paper, on an inside story that was buried, in the last two sentences, there was a story that said DeSantis' emergency management administrator admitted that they had 1 million COVID tests that they'd let expire in Tallahassee at the end of December. Now I'm going to say the media got played on that one. I think that should have been more aggressively pursued. So it happens in both ways. There are some criticisms, but one of the things I find solace in is there are still a lot of people who read us, including the people who don't necessarily like us. Some of my most loyal fans hate me. I've had one guy who's told me he's not going to read me anymore for 12 years, and he writes me every week to let me know how much he didn't like the thing he didn't read was. But there is a problem when you're being told not to believe what you see with your own eyes. And I don't know how to get around that. And to give you one example, there was a man, I can't even remember what the story was. He said, I want you to write about why this is the case. And it was some national story. And I responded to him, I said, sir, I can find the information that proves your belief in this case is not true. But before I spend the time finding the documents and give them to you, I need to ask, is it going to make a difference in your opinion? And he responded, don't waste your time. I don't know how to help a person like that. And there is some more of that going on. I will say that the past couple of years have actually been a little bit better for newspapers. Our subscriptions are going up right now. The Washington Post has been going up right now. Oh, I should have given the Wall Street Journal a kudos a little while ago. They are the one major paper in America that never made their product free. Maybe because they know Wall Street and they know how to make a profit. They kept theirs subscription from the get-go. But overall papers, I don't think we're in danger of dying yet, but who knows, that could be my last words. Yes, ma'am.
I'll stand, I'm short.
Okay.
Could you touch on you haven't touched anything on medicine. Could you touch on the broken state guardianship program?
One thing I have learned is not to sound off too much about things I'm not an expert in. And that one I have not written that much about. Our paper has written a number of times about it, and I think we led some I'm going to say minor efforts toward reform on the heels of the Rebecca, I'm going to watch her last name, I want to say Fearley case. Yeah, but there is a whole lot of power that is entrusted upon in guardians, and there needs to be some more regulation. We've been trying to watch that. There hadn't been as much coverage. I would tell you, well, you're going to get me on a soapbox. What you're really talking about here is one of my pet peeves, the vulnerable. And I would submit that the vulnerable do not get the attention they should. One of the worst stories in my estimation, and I've pounded a drum on this for years now, is disabled families with disabilities in this state. There is a program that says if you have someone, and we're not talking about like, just a broken ankle or something. Lots of these are people with profound disabilities, kids who can't lift their own heads up. They're in wheelchairs that have them propped up and they have to be fed in a tube. There is a program called a Medicaid waiver that says if you're in one of these situations, you're supposed to get a waiver that provides services for respite care, which is incredibly needed for a single mom who can't be there for 24 hours a day. Right now, the waiting list for that population is 22,000 people, and the average wait is 7 years. 40% of the families on that list have already been waiting for a decade. There are children who are born and diagnosed with an illness and die before they ever get served. I'm going to submit that's because that population does not have a good lobby. That population is not cutting those $100,000 checks that I was talking about and I'll be writing in Sunday's story. I think the vulnerable, I think Democrats and Republicans can disagree on some things, but I think most of us agree that we have an obligation to care for those who can't care for themselves. And elderly person with dementia or Alzheimer or a 12-year-old who can't feed themselves would qualify. 20 years ago, when Jeb Bush was governor, now this was as a result of a lawsuit, that waiting list did not exist. Every single family that qualified for help got it. That means it's doable. In fact, Jeb Bush said after they funded it that it elevated the entire status of the state to serve that population. We could do it again. The people who run the state simply do not want to.
Scott, I want another question.
Yes, sir.
Do you believe Facebook and Twitter should be protected under 230?
Under 230? I don't think I know 230.
They can't be sued.
Oh, I don't think, I'm speaking a little bit off the cuff here, but I don't think any organization should not be able to be sued. I can speak more authoritatively. Yeah, no, I should be able to be sued. You should be able to sue me. Please don't, but you should be able to sue me or the Sentinel. More of what I've covered, and I think what you've seen about, is attempts to regulate Facebook and Twitter by politicians. And this is another example of a bill that was passed by the Florida legislature and signed by the governor that is blatantly and clearly unconstitutional. They passed a law that said, this was after Donald Trump got thrown off Twitter, that said no platform is ever allowed to edit or remove any post by any politician. That politician could post child porn, that politician could lie, that politician could use the N-word or anything else, and under the law that was signed by the governor, passed by the legislature, they would not be able to do anything about it on private platforms that they fund. If you're a true conservative, if you're a true constitutionalist, that's not a good idea. And it was a judge appointed by, I can't remember, they've had their laws rejected by so many different ones, but a judge said that's clearly a violation of a company's right to monitor its own platform. So I believe that they should be sued. I don't believe they should be policed for content, but I do support more transparency in what they do. I believe consumers have a right to understand how their data is being used. If any of you have ever, if you want to watch a depressing documentary, is it The Social Network? I think that's the name of it. On Netflix, the best line that sticks with you from that one is if you're not paying for a product, you are the product. And the data that these companies use and how they use it is pretty shocking. And you've seen it before. You want to plan a trip to Cleveland and you Google Cleveland, and then for the next 2 weeks, you've got ads for Cleveland popping up in every media you use, and that's because they're giving it to other people. So I think consumer protection is a place where government should step in, but not to control the speech. Yes, sir. Or
Scott, what have you learned about how to not let an issue die? You write about one, and you maybe follow up on it with a month later and say, well, look what's happening now.
That is a great question, because I will tell you that if I've ever been able to affect change on anything, it has been through persistency.
What was the question?
How do you make a decision to keep following up on things, to not let it...
Not just that, but isn't there some way in which you can get other people excited about the issue?
We try.
Like this. I mean, talking to groups like this, doesn't that help?
It can. I'll check back with you guys in 2 weeks and you can tell me what you did as a result of what I talked about. Because a lot of times people write me about something, a column, and they go, boy, that just ticks me off what the legislature just did. And I'll say, oh, I know, I wrote about it. I'm the one who ticked you off. I need you to go tell the legislators. I need you to vote them out of office. I mean, the stat that often gets thrown around about Congress is that, I'm making this up, but it's generally correct, is that like 80% of Americans hate Congress and 80% of them love their own congressman? I mean, think about that. That doesn't make sense. That means, in my estimation, they're playing you. So yeah, I try to get folks more worked up. I try to look with groups that are working in that space for this disabled citizens issue I was talking about. I'm trying to get, I shouldn't say I'm trying to get, I'm inquiring groups why, if they're interested in suing the state again. That's what got the waiting list down to 0 last time. That's what I think need to happen this time. And we've seen people take action. We wrote about gerrymandering for a long time. And finally there was groups led by the League of Women Voters, which did spectacular work, that passed an amendment that you all passed with overwhelming to pass fair districting, to rein that in. The politicians still play games with it, but it is better than it used to be. So try to get other groups involved. Yes, sir, right behind you.
Do you have an opinion about whether or not Chris Dorworth is going to succeed?
I have several opinions on Chris Dorworth. What it succeeded? Oh, you mean in the River Cross? Do I think he will succeed? I think he will not succeed. What he's asking about, in case anybody doesn't know, is Dorworth is a former legislator, and I'll be honest with you. Do you remember about 30 minutes ago when I said I had politicians who'd been telling me for 15 years I would lose my job, and yet they were the ones who lost theirs? Yeah, he's one of them. He was slated to be House Speaker, and that didn't work out so well for him. I don't think it will pass, but I don't put anything past him. He wants to develop in an area called the Rural Boundary up in Seminole County, and that issue has lit up Seminole County. They have been really solid about voting to protect that. So since he couldn't win with the elected officials and he couldn't win in the court of public opinion, he's actually gone to court multiple times. I don't think he will succeed, but I wouldn't bank on it. I don't know.
What does your paper do to stimulate political discussion in the high schools?
In the high schools, I don't know that we do that much, to be honest, anymore. We used to circulate papers to the high schools. I don't know if the high schools still want the papers, but I will say I think we have online access to the papers. They do them, but we don't do as many events as we used to in general. We used to have, I'm forgetting what they're called. It was, Sentinel Conversation, something like that. We used to have pretty regular events to sort of stimulate civic discourse. I've hosted a couple of really cool ones. I had one with Carl Hyacin and Dave Barry that we did. We did one with Bill Clinton and James Patterson, when they wrote a book. Scott Pelley came down to do one of those. But as a product of a shrinking staff and a shrinking newsroom, we don't have as many of those as we used to. So I would like to tell you something otherwise. Yes, sir.
If you woke up tomorrow morning,
I hope so.
And discovered that you had the magical power to change one, but only one thing to make Central Florida a better place, what would it be?
In Central Florida. if you ask me that about the world, I've often said money in politics. I really believe it affects everything else. And I guess that's still the case for Central Florida. It comes back to where there are hotel taxes, the convention center, the bus system. I think money in politics absolutely warps a system that is at its core was created with ideal values and has the potential to function in a great way, and yet has been so warped by massive amounts of money that corrupt people who often go to Tallahassee or Washington, D.C. with good intentions. So much so that they work in these bubbles and they're surrounded by lobbyists rather than constituents, the ones who are handing them checks, that they don't even really realize they're doing it anymore. So I think that's the same answer for national as it would be local. I think to somehow combat the corrupting power of money.
Yeah, Scott, thank you very much.
Yeah.
A couple of things. You almost sounded more optimistic than I expected with regards to the viability of local papers since close to 2,000 papers have closed since 2000, and the circulation has dropped by 50% from 55 million. And no other business or institution can hold politicians accountable for what they do. And I don't mean just politicians, but anybody serving local government or courts, etc. Nobody else can really hold them accountable. And you make a significant point with regards to following the money. You're correct about Citizens United, but in 2021, the Supreme Court in Americans for Prosperity case basically stated, no, you don't have to always reveal who the sources of your money is.
Well, first of all, the second part I absolutely agree with. That's what I was trying to get at, maybe not so eloquently earlier. The trade-off with Citizens United was supposed to be unlimited money in exchange for total disclosure. We do not have total disclosure, but we do have rules for it still in this state which are not being followed, which is where the dark money comes in. There have been a ton of newspaper shutterings. There's even, the Sentinel is still good, and then we print 7 days a week. There are a lot of papers that do not print 7 days a week, including the state's largest, the Tampa Bay Times. They became the biggest after Tampa and St. Pete merged together. They don't even print 7 days a week. I think we've reached sort of a plateau. There were a bunch of shutterings, I'm going to say, in the 2000s, in the mid-2000s. There were some during the recession. I think we've reached a little bit of a plateau, but I don't mean to spit shine any of that. I agree with you about we're one of the few that can hold accountable. Because we are the only ones that are sending people to the planning and zoning meeting when they're going on. We're the only ones going to the local cities, and we're not even doing that the way we used to. And I will tell you, one of the other reasons I stay is because I still get answer to my questions, even from the politicians who hate me with the core of their being. There are very few that don't respond because they know that for the most part, there's still a trust factor. And that we get more eyeballs. We may not have more eyeballs than all of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram combined for certain, but we've got more as a collective unit of that affects voters and homeowners and taxpayers than most. And I think if you think about what you see, if you follow Facebook, if you see 10 different sources scrolling through your timeline, I bet you're going to put more stock in one that comes from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or dare I say the Orlando Sentinel, than one that comes from a website you've never heard of before. So I think we've still got that credibility.
Okay, I've got one question here and one over there, and I think that'll wrap
Okay.
up.
Okay, Scott.
All right.
When the pandemic started, one of the things that we heard was that a lot of the important media were losing readership and money, and so then we, subscribed to the New York Times and to the Washington Post. And when I kept thinking about the Orlando Sentinel, the one thing, of course, I think you're a beacon at the Orlando Sentinel, but I have always heard that, and in my small amount of reading of it, that it is a conservative newspaper. And so then I want to know if you can convince me of other attributes of the Orlando Sentinel to make me, put my bucks in there in order to read your news.
I think there are a lot of conservatives who might take issue with that. I will tell you that historically, we were a conservative paper. Our paper went 50 years without endorsing a Democrat for president. Barack Obama, I think we may have made an exception for Kennedy, but it was a half century without endorsing it was all one Republican after the other. And I should mention that through all of that half century, there were people that called the Orlando Sentinel the liberal media. I'm going to tell you that editorially, we're probably left of center, but I think we're more good government than anything else. That's where I am, left of center, more good government than anything else. But here's the most important thing. I and the editorial board are the tiniest portion. I mean, I got a big head that they put in the paper on a regular basis, but man, 95% of what goes into the paper every day is the story about what's happening in Castleberry, what's happening at the health department, what's happening at the library. Oh, not that we need another story on the Winter Park Library, but I mean, 95% of the stuff, they're my colleagues who are just out there trying to get answers about what's happening in your community. They're telling the stories about the nonprofits that are struggling and the health crises that are going and where you can go to get help or get a mask or get a vaccine. So I think sometimes people mistakenly put a little too much emphasis on what I say or what the editorial board says. And by the way, I don't even agree with the editorial board some of the time. And I've written columns to the contrary. And I think 95% of what we do is just giving community news about this community. So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Oh, you talk about following the money. How will this cryptocurrency business affect will there be any way to track donations or?
So we're all friends here, and I'm going to be honest with you, all right? I don't know what the hell cryptocurrency is about.
I don't either, but it's there.
But let me tell you this. More importantly, I am convinced that the vast majority of the people pushing cryptocurrency don't understand what the hell it's about either. And I was selling myself a little short. I've done some reading, I've done some watching. I understand generally kind of what's going on there. But I find most of the people who are pushing cryptocurrency, they're not the ones I put most of my faith in as a politician. The biggest cryptocurrency pusher here in Central Florida was Joel Greenberg. He installed a Bitcoin machine and then used the county money to buy Bitcoin. I think it's going to be, I would say it's a wave of the future, but it's a part of the present, and it's a big part of it right now. And there is a mayor in South Florida, I think it's either Miami or Miami Beach, who wants to make Miami the new cryptocurrency center of the country. I think when people don't understand things, it's a recipe for problems. And I'm convinced that a lot of the policymakers, especially when they get wooed by cryptocurrency people, don't understand what exactly they're advocating, and I think that's a recipe for trouble, but I'm not an expert. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really enjoyed the lunch.